It's a combination, this next session, of input from Professor Shi and my colleague here, Professor Hilary Kremen. I'll give a little bit more of a biographical introduction in a second. The first will be 15 minutes using Zoom, and the second about the same amount in person in 3 dimensions. And then, again, we'll open up this for a conversation. And then we'll have a well-earned cup of tea and coffee. Can I just check that we've got the Zoom link connected? Yes. So the only challenge is that I can't see that. Is it possible to have that so I can see that? Fantastic. Professor Shi, good afternoon to you. I'm just going to introduce you. My name is Professor Bill Lucas, and I'm really looking forward to coming to see you next week. Professor Shi is Dean of the Institute of Education at TsingHua University. He's a specialist in education and the philosophy of education, and he's going to start our double-headed presentation with an exploration from his perspective of our topic today. Professor.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bill Lucas. It is a great honor for me to attend this meeting in this way. First of all, I would like to give a presentation. Okay. I'm delighted to accept Mr. Bill Lucas' invitation to participate in the 2023 International Summit on Creativity in Education Online, engaging discussions with colleagues from the international education community on the topics of creative education and the cultivation of critical thinking. Undoubtedly, creativity and critical thinking are becoming increasingly crucial in today's society. First, with the advent of the knowledge economy era and the uncertainties of a changing age, traditional ideas, experiences, and problem-solving strategies are revealing their conservatism and inadequacy. There is an urgent need for people to examine their surroundings and challenges with creative thinking, analyze and solve problems. In the era of the internet, big data, and artificial intelligence, we receive a vast amount of information every day, making it challenging to distinguish truth from falsehood. Some even claim that we have entered a post-truth era. Critical thinking is essential for maintaining independent thought and status. Without critical thinking, we are easily enslaved by an overwhelming amount of information, becoming slaves to information. Therefore, it is observed that many countries and international organizations in the world today consider the cultivation of creativity and critical thinking in students are core competencies to be pursued in educational activities. China's education is no exception, since the issuance of the decision on educational system reform by the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China and the State Council in 1985. China has listed the cultivation of students' creative and critical thinking as the core goal of educational reform, alongside core goals such as social responsibility and practical abilities. The National Medium and Long-Term Educational Reform and Development Plan Outline, issued in 2010, reiterated the importance of cultivating students' creative and critical thinking, and made arrangements for how to reform curriculum, teaching methods, and evaluation methods. Guided by these policy documents, schools at all levels in China has taken substantial steps in cultivating students' creative and critical thinking. Regarding universities, many have begun supporting undergraduate research activities, establishing undergraduate research funds. Some universities also offer general education courses aiming to break through disciplinary limitations and knowledge-centered approaches, dedicated to cultivating students' interdisciplinary critical thinking. Some universities even offer specific critical thinking courses, combining the cultivation of critical thinking with specific learning materials, such as ecological issues, the application of artificial intelligence technology, public health issues, and more. In primary and secondary schools, the autonomy of school curriculum has further expanded. In addition to the national unified curriculum, local and school-based courses have become diverse, releasing and satisfying students' personalized learning needs. Problem-based learning, project-based learning, and a large amount of research-oriented learning models have emerged. The educational soil of cultivating the curiosity, desire for knowledge, and the critical spirit of primary and secondary school students has become richer. The connection between secondary schools and the universities is strengthening, with more inquiry-based approaches appearing in secondary school classrooms. Under the guidance of the Ministry of Education, regions such as Beijing have introduced the specialized projects like the Soaring Plan, aimed at cultivating students' scientific interests. These projects support high school students in engaging in exploratory research activities with scientists in university laboratories. In summary, since the end of the last century, especially in this century, Chinese education has increasingly emphasized the cultivation of creativity and critical thinking in young people, making a significant trend. However, objectively speaking, due to the influence of traditional culture, outdated views on education quality, and the impact of the entrance examination systems, progress in cultivating students' creativity and critical thinking in Chinese primary, secondary, and tertiary education has not been very significant, or more accurately, it has not reached the ideal level. China has a tradition of valuing education since ancient times, you know, and parents hope that their children could achieve personal development and social status improvement through education. However, constrained by the priority given to the quantity of higher quality educational resources, there is intense competition surrounding admission to higher quality secondary schools and top-tier universities. In this large context, the competition in the entrance exams is very high. These exams, mainly relying on paper and pencil testing, primarily evaluate students' mastery, understanding, and simulated application of subject knowledge. Therefore, students' creative and critical thinking is challenging to measure in the entrance exams. Traditionally, heavy reliance on extensive memorization and problem-solving training remains an effective pace in dealing with these exams and is favored by teachers and students. As a university professor, I often feel that students' awareness of problems, exploratory spirit, innovation, and critical thinking abilities are insufficient, especially among those who enter university through intense competition. In some rural areas, Western regions, and weaker schools, the phenomenon of knowledge-centered teaching is still prominent. These issues have received high attention from Chinese educators, researchers, and policymakers. It is believed that with the reform of the Chinese secondary and tertiary education models, these issues will gradually be addressed in the future. From a practical perspective, there are still many shortcomings in Chinese teachers' efforts to cultivate students' creativity and critical thinking. Firstly, there is insufficient awareness of the value of cultivating students' creative and critical thinking. A deeper understanding of the individual, social, and national values of students' creative and critical thinking is lacking. Many teachers still consider helping students achieve high scores and smoothly enter high-level schools and colleges as their primary task. Secondly, there is a lack of understanding of the concepts of creative and critical thinking, and the inability to grasp the connotations of these concepts and their specific manifestations in subject teaching activities and students' developmental processes. For some teachers, creativity may be seen as a lofty goal, while critical thinking may be considered a negative and unworthy quality to encourage. Furthermore, there is a lack of confidence and effective methods among teachers to cultivate students' creative and critical thinking in traditional subject classrooms. Some may believe that such classrooms may become disorderly or difficult to manage. Lastly, teachers may face constraints due to lack of curriculum resources and inadequate support from the curriculum and teaching evaluation system. If school leaders and education authorities do not support creative classrooms and the cultivation of critical thinking, it becomes challenging for individual teachers to make a difference. In summary, from a practical standpoint, Chinese teachers face systematic obstacles in cultivating students' creativity and critical thinking, spanning from a shift in mindset to the reconstruction of habits, and further to institutional and cultural reforms. I believe this situation is not exclusive to Chinese school system, but exists in educational systems of other developing countries as well. In this sense, can we consider it a common issue facing global education system reforms? Of course, these issues manifest differently in various countries and regions. To facilitate and assist the global educational system in addressing such issues, the OECD's establishment of the Creative Education Forum and the development of the Professional Learning Framework for fostering and assessing creativity and critical thinking are of particular significance. The framework is well designed with a clear arrangement of 10 modules, each specifying goals and providing concrete deployment plans for achieving them, demonstrating strong operability and guidance. Implementing this framework in different countries may involve various channels. In China, a practical approach might involve first identifying pilot regions, such as Beijing, Shanghai, or cities like Hefei in the central region and Chengdu in the western region. Collaborating with the Instruction Research Office or teachers training departments in these regions, invite them to participate, and nurture them as seed teachers. Once they grasp the key points, they can guide schools to develop corresponding curriculum and teaching plans to integrate the cultivation of students' creativity and critical thinking into the overall educational objectives of the school. It is anticipated that this process will not be accomplished overnight and may encounter various difficulties and challenges. It is precisely because of these potential challenges and efforts that more educators need to make a proactive action and firm strong solidarity. Thank you.
Professor Xie, thank you so much. When you say to us that there are many similarities between your assessment of the challenges, you mention understanding the value of creativity, understanding some of its concepts, the distinction between creativity and critical thinking, the confidence of teachers. You could have been in the room with us this morning because we've been talking about many of those things, so thank you so much. And when you give us some pointers about what we might do next, the idea of pilot regions, of partnerships, of a gradual integration into education objectives is really helpful. So thank you very, very much indeed. We'll come back to you, if we may, with a few questions, but for now, I'm going to pass to my colleague here, Hilary Kremin, Professor at the University of Cambridge, heads the Faculty of Education, and she enjoys exploring the big and difficult issues of the future of education. I think it would be fair to say, Hilary, not least of which and very topical at the moment, peace education. Will you please put your hands together and welcome Hilary?
Thank you. So I'd like to start by sharing a dilemma, which is what happens when you turn up to make a presentation and you discover that the excellent speakers and experts that we have in the room have already shared much of what you were intending to share in your PowerPoints. So what I do in that situation is I try to walk my talk when it comes to creativity. And to think about all education, shared learning opportunities as dialogue involving the arts, involving body, mind, heart, and soul, and to think differently about what you might actually do. So I've thought on my feet and decided to share with you a poem. I think it's probably the time in the day where a poem might be quite useful, actually. It's a poem that I wrote a few years ago. So as well as writing books and journal articles, I also write poems as well. And where I can, I try to combine the two. So a lot of my research uses poetic inquiry. So a few years ago, I was asked by some of our doctoral students in the faculty to make a presentation as part of a panel about representation in educational research. And it was in the early days of thinking about decolonizing the curriculum. And the students were thinking about what are our moral and ethical obligations when we talk about people, about our research participants. And how do we ensure that we are not allowing Eurocentric academic elite knowledge to disempower and create exclusionary spaces. So instead of making a PowerPoint presentation, I stood up and read the following poem, and I'd like to share that poem with you today. So the poem is called Bloodless Angel. I am a bloodless angel. I float in airy efficacy. I exist outside of history, outside of time. I have no place. I speak from nowhere in particular. I speak from everywhere. I have no thoughts. I convey what is thought. I have no feet, so I leave no footprint. I have no hands, so I do not act. I have no body. Prick me, and I will not bleed. They say that God is dead, that his palace in heaven is vacant, that wind blows through empty rooms and mice chew on velvet curtains. I say that God's palace is occupied. Its rooms are full, its curtains intact. It's occupied by reason, science, rationality, enlightenment. It's occupied by me. I rest on my canon, my validity, my reliability, my rationale. I consort with kings, with prime ministers, presidents, philanthropists. They lend me their ears. They ask me what is true, what is valuable, and what is right. They are eager to know. The subjects of my research are not kings or presidents or angels. The subjects of my research are gendered, ethnic, gay, disabled, poor. They have bodies, entangled in the messiness of time and space, grounded in clay. Prick them and they bleed. These bodies are fascinating to me. I wish to know every intimacy. What does someone with your gender think? What choices would someone in your ethnic group make? How is your life impacted by poverty? My view from nowhere pierces there somewhere. I bestow voice upon them. I give them the gift of the word. I represent them. I work for social justice, peace, and sustainability. I turn their utterances into gold. I've heard there's another coming through. She unsettles me. The arrogance, speaks only for herself. She stands in the mud and the clay of her positionality, bizarrely proud of her bricolage, her participatory methodology, her new story, her research journey. She speaks of post-coloniality, patriarchy, elitism. She renders me an actor in this world, gendered, embodied, classed. She dares to colour me white. I'm starting to feel unsettled, and yet, what is there to fear? What harm, what truth could possibly be held within the arms of one simple poem? Thank you. So there are a lot of themes there to do with what I believe is one of the biggest challenges that we face. How do we undo the harms of the worst excesses of Enlightenment thinking, modernity, Eurocentric ways of thinking about the world? And how do we move towards valuing localized, embodied knowledge throughout the world? How do we create epistemic democracy? How do we work together in order to find unity in diversity? So I will now move to presenting my slides, and I will go through them quite quickly, skipping the bits that we've already spoken about. So here in the Faculty of Education in Cambridge, we have a variety of research groups and centres, and our teaching, including the work that we do with our practitioners, is grounded in our research groups. And you can see there that we have a research group around arts and creativities, around children's literature, and around things like knowledge, power, politics, and so on. So I want to talk, I've got 3 slides coming up, which talk about the change that I feel needs to happen if we are to move towards creativity in education to a greater degree. So I'm starting with creative leadership for change. I don't want to present here a series of binaries, because I'm not saying that we move from one to another. I'm not saying that change is linear, but I would like to suggest that we might de-emphasize the one in order to re-emphasize the other. So the first one builds on my own research, which is in education, peace and conflict. And I would say that we need to move from negative peace and peacekeeping, which dominate in schools, over to positive peace. So positive and negative peace are concepts that come from the field of peace studies, and that were first developed by Johan Galtung from Norway. And he postulates basically that negative peace is the absence of direct violence. And we achieve that through peacekeeping. So we see that in countries of the world where we have the peacekeepers in to stop fighting. And I would argue that we have that in most schools around the world, where we use surveillance, control, proliferation of rules, keeping people apart in order to pacify and control. This may lead to silent corridors, zero tolerance policies, and the appearance of peace. But actually, this is a negative peace because it fails to address indirect violence, so structural and cultural violence. So structural violence, according to Johan Galtung, is the kind of violence that's built into our societies, into our institutions, built into our business as usual. That means that some groups within society, within education, will flourish, whereas others won't. Cultural violence is the violence that exists in our cultures and societies, which means that structural violence is invisible to us. We don't see it. It's the way that we go blind. It's the way that we enable ourselves to continue to live in grossly unfair and unequal societies, whilst believing that we continue to work towards justice and social mobility. So positive peace out in the world and also within education, we achieve through new forms of peacemaking that are inclusive and democratic and non-punitive and restorative, and through peace building. So working to create the capacity within societies and within schools for peace, which involves active and mindful work to create the language, the structures to enable peace from the level of inner peace through interpersonal, through to community, through to national, through to global. That's why I find peace such a beautiful concept, because it goes from right from the level of the individual through to the level of the world and beyond, actually, to beyond the Anthropocene, to environmental peace, and also to the cosmic visions of peace as well. So we also need to go from business as usual to the moral imagination, which is a concept from Jean-Paul Lederach, who talks about how we can't work towards a better world until we can imagine a better world. So he places the imagination as fundamental in what we need to be doing with education. My latest book that has stalled because of my current role as head of faculty, sadly, is called Rewilding Education. I'm getting up at 5 in the morning at the moment in order to try to do at least half an hour a day on it to get it back on track. But education has become a monoculture. So in the same way as we have agribusiness and we have monocultures throughout the world that we are beginning to tackle through permaculture, through rewilding, and through organic farming, we need to think in the same way about education. We need to allow many flowers to bloom when it comes to education, rather than having this idea of a one-size-fits-all education, which is strangling growth and creativity, and which is making us sick. I said that we need to move from ideas of maternity, Eurocentric truth, even humanism. We need to integrate ideas of post-modernity, multiple truths, post-humanism, beyond the Anthropocene. We are one species amongst many on this planet, and we are doing enormous harm to the species who we share the planet with. We need to think of ourselves as part of an ecosystem rather than dominating an ecosystem. And that's so fundamental for what we're doing in education. We need to move away from Enlightenment thinking, which was at the heart of my poem. This idea of objective, scientific reasoning and knowledge from nowhere, over to knowledge that's deeply embodied, deeply subjective and experienced. We have a lot to learn from the wisdom traditions of the world, particularly from the global south and the global east, from the perspective of Europe, where we can think more about how we think through the body, and about how we integrate mind, heart, soul, and the big existential questions that face us. We can learn a lot from our colleagues in China, from Taoism, from Confucianism, from Buddhism, from Hindu traditions, from yogic traditions, and so on, where ideas of peace and harmony dominate, rather than peace as simply security and the absence of fighting. So how can we think differently about what it is to be human, what it is to live in peace, about an aesthetic of beauty, peace and harmony? So our curriculum then needs to move from thinking about ourselves as masters of the world. A colleague, Bonnet, who was in Cambridge, talks about how our education systems perpetuate a metaphysics of mastery. That somehow we are still teaching that the problems that we face will be solved one day through a technical solution from a boffin who's going to be clever enough to tell the rest of us how we can capture carbon, or how we will find a technical solution. We can continue our business as usual. We don't really need to change. We just need to continue to dominate nature. We need to move from that to thinking of nature as teacher, thinking about cycles, thinking about sustainability, and, as I say, becoming part of an ecosystem. We need to move from a Eurocentric curriculum to a decolonized curriculum that values learning and wisdom from across the world. We need to move from an education system that continues to credentialize elites, despite the myth that's perpetuated in education of social mobility and of inclusion. Governments throughout the world are keen to convince their electorates that the next iteration of the education system is finally going to bring about equity and justice. And what we see is education playing a very significant part in reproducing global inequality, which is unsustainable. We really are in the final decades of being able to continue to live in this way. I don't know what the outcome will be, but education has to move away from business as usual towards a curriculum that's fit for purpose for the 21st century. The because the young people in our classrooms at the moment are going to face the kind of dilemmas and problems and difficulties and challenges that we can only begin to imagine. And we have not yet woken up to that in our education systems. We need to move from test and recall to an arts-based mindset. And when I talk about an arts-based mindset, I think of that across the curriculum, including in the sciences. How do we ask bigger questions? It's what we've been talking about today with AI. So finally, with creative, continuing professional development and learning, we need to go from teachers seen as an apprentice to teachers as public intellectuals and innovators, from teachers as consumers of research to teachers doing and producing research, from CPD being expert-led to communities of practice, from command and control, from governments and policymakers to trusting and enabling teachers. And finally, I just want to share that we have a PPD framework in Cambridge and an MEd, which is beginning to apply some of these ideas and principles. So we have bite-sized modules of PPD study, which are a sixth of a master's each. Modules include things like art, nature and well-being, transforming conflict, museum learning, and so on. It's a Saturday plus online learning. You can do 3 of these and then go on to the full MEd, or you can exit just with a certificate for one single module. So our MEd has diverse entry routes, including having done a PGCE in the faculty. It's built around communities of practice, flipped learning, and our assessment is about the creation of an artifact, and the artifacts can be created collaboratively in groups as well as by individuals. It might include a scheme of work, some training for your own school. It might be an exhibition in a local art gallery or in a library, and so we're trying to innovate when it comes to assessing master's level courses for practitioners. Right, I'm going to stop. Thank you.
Hilary, thank you so much indeed. Your poem came at the perfect moment in the day. You're a scholar poet. I've never heard anybody manage to make me excited with the words validity, reliability and rationale. But you did it in your Bloodless Angel, and it was a really timely interjection, and so many beautiful phrases taken from others, but meant something different when it's the idea of epistemic democracy, the idea of structural violence, which we just don't see. And we really hope you have some time to write your rewilding education book. It sounds like just what we need. So I'm just going to start with one question from me for Professor Scher, and then I'm going to open the floor to us all. Professor Scher, what stage are you at with your very exciting creativity and critical reforms in your education system? You told us a little bit about some pilot initiatives, and we'd love to hear just a little bit more about that if we could. I'm wondering whether either my English was inaudible, or whether I need one of my friends to translate me, or whether you just couldn't hear me. Can you hear us okay? I think you might be on mute.
Okay, thank you.
That's all right. That's perfect
could
now.
Could you repeat your question again?
Yes, and I've got a Chinese colleague here who can translate if necessary. So can you tell us what stage you are at with your educational reforms in putting creativity and critical thinking into the curriculum?
You mean in China?
Yes.
Okay. And how to express? 20 years later, the Ministry of Chinese Education has always emphasized the significance of cultivating students' creativity and critical thinking. However, just as I reported in my presentation, the Chinese educators also face some practical and systematic obstacles. So it is a big question for Chinese educators to improve in this direction. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to invite colleagues from around the room here. But to give you just a little bit of thinking time, would you like just to turn to your neighbour for a second to come up with a good question? And when you've done that, I'll do my best to stop you having good questions and invite you to share them with the wider room. So just 1 minute, turn to your neighbour and come up with a good question for our two excellent speakers.
Hi, Bill. Can I try to answer a question I got in advance?
Of course. Let me just ask the room to be quiet for a second. And do please take the floor, Professor Scher, and tell us the question and please tell us your thoughts on it.
Okay. Very briefly. I got 6 questions in advance totally. I would like to answer one of them. The question, the interesting question, let me see which one. Okay, oh yeah. And the question is, you mentioned that rural regions are still fixed in knowledge-based learning. What steps are being taken to spread critical and creative thinking out across the country, outside the big cities? And my answer is, educational reform in rural areas is also proceeding slowly. From my personal observation, this includes establishing a concrete view of the quality of education, making the healthy growth of students the core purpose of education rather than examinations and vocational promotion, increasing the training of teachers to continuously improve their educational and teaching skills, reforming the classroom teaching model by introducing various teaching models such as problem-based teaching, project-based teaching, research-based learning, and cooperative group learning, and further developing curriculum resources to meet the diverse and individualized learning needs of students, and so on.
Thank you so much. And I'm now going to have another go and hope that when you were talking to your neighbour, you came up with a wonderful question. I can see a colleague over here.
Thank you, Bill. Nick Corsten, I run a non-profit called STEAMCO. I'm just a dad, so no tricky questions, please. For us, STEAMCO, creativity is around creativity, not just in the workplace and fueling the economy, as we've heard today, but also in communities, in our work, in our lives, and in schools. And the big point for me today came from the Director General of the EIB, where he asked the big question, the billion-dollar question, what is the point of school? Which was actually the title of a book that started me on my journey by a colleague of Bill's, Professor Guy Claxton. For many, education is about educating a workforce, but in a world where artificial intelligence and robots are going to take a lot of jobs, how do we justify spending tax dollars on an education system? So the Chinese education system is one of the biggest in the world. Do you see creativity and critical thinking being a major part of the education system for every child in every school, in every community across China? or just the young people that are closer to the economic centres and, if you like, the more thriving aspects, parts of your economy?
Nick, thanks so much for the question. Just because of the complexity of it, although you said you were only a dad, quite a few of us are dads, I'm going to actually turn to Hilary and just invite her, because she was talking so much about, well, teachers as public intellectuals and a wholly reconfigured version of education. How would you answer Nick's question?
I really struggle here because I would like to be hopeful, but I've spent a lot of my time thinking about why is it that despite the fact that most of us, parents, citizens, know what we want for young people from the education system, it seems that cultures of schooling throughout the world continue to be structurally and culturally violent, and actually knowledge and test and a narrow curriculum continue to motivate voters to vote for particular jurisdictions that talk about control and talk about economic benefits. It seems very, very hard to break into that kind of discourse. I've thought very, very radically about, could we think about education throughout the life course, which would actually mean that young people have much, much more choice about how they want to spend their time. So, for example, could we enable young people to decide that they would like to come to school later in the day because of what's happening in their bodies around adolescence? Do we feel that we would like to support young people to take some time out in order to go deeply into an extended project of one kind or another? Do we want to enable young people even to make poor choices and then to return to education at age 30 in order to do something based on a newfound passion or interest or need? Do we want to replace schools with really state-of-the-art further education colleges where an 8-year-old might learn alongside an 80-year-old in a maths classroom? Do we want learning to happen in museums and in care homes and in art galleries and in shops, enabled by a wider range of adults? Do we want to return to the idea that it takes a whole village to educate a child? My own feeling is that we need to retain the idea of teachers as gifted enablers of learning. But it would be fantastic, in my view, if teachers could go from 1 minute giving a lecture to 200 people to talking about a learning journey with a 12-year-old the next minute, through to facilitating an all-age class in a circle the next. So I'm thinking quite radically when I talk about what schools could be. I've spent a lot of my career thinking about how we can reform schools. I'm not sure they are capable of reform. When I look at the thinking that happens within education systems around the world, I mean, it's not only years behind the times, it's decades behind the times. We have a kind of conservatism when we think about education and schools that means that we carry on. We just keep doing it, and we know it's not working, and parents know it's not working, employers know that it's not working. Do I see change happening anytime soon? No, I don't. And I think that's as much to do with the way that we organise our society around childhood, childcare, and so on, as it is to do with any genuine belief that what we're doing is right. So I would like to see radical change. And I think if we don't do it consciously, it's going to happen anyway as we start to see things unravel with the climate emergency and so on.
So the answer to the question here is a radical one, perhaps unsurprisingly from my right here. Professor Scher, the question here was about the vision for education that you have, and you have already told us how China is moving towards valuing core competencies and using learning methods like project and problem-based learning. And I wondered, probably this is the last question, what are you most excited about in the year ahead in China? What are you excited about? What is making you happy as you look forward to the next year?
And yes, according to my own observation, Chinese policymakers, educational researchers, and most of educators come to form some common sense about the significance of cultivating students' creativity and critical thinking. So, from my own point of view, it is hopeful for some for the emergence of radical change in Chinese educational system. And I welcome all of you to visit China in the following years and to witness the change of Chinese educational system.
That, if I may say so, is a facilitator's dream end. Thank you so much, Professor Scher. Thank you, Professor Kremin. Absolutely brilliant. There might just possibly be an outbreak of common sense, and the emergence of creativity across the education system is something to be devoutly dreamt of. So thank you very much. Do please put your hands together and thank our two brilliant speakers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.